Alright, y'all, we are back. I'm recording this over spring break, so I hope all of you are having a wonderful break from class and from school and trying to do whatever you can to stay sane. But in this video, we're going to take a look at Chapter 14, Manifest Destiny. So let's go ahead and let's pull that up. And let's go for it. Okay, so actually, make myself a little bit, I'll leave that there. Make myself a little bit smaller. Okay. Alright, y'all, so Manifest Destiny, Chapter 14. And just as a quick little note, I ended Chapter 13 with some stuff on black activism. It's probably really covered more in Chapter 14, so just as an aside, look at that stuff on Chapter 13, the stuff I kind of finished up with as far as black activism. Be familiar with that stuff for this chapter quiz as well, okay? So kind of think black activism in both Chapter 13 and Chapter 14, okay? But anyway, Chapter 14, Manifest Destiny. So we look at our general notions, y'all. Manifest Destiny is the belief that it was the United States' destiny to expand across North America and spread our influence. Y'all, Americans start to get to a point where they think, like, look, we are destined. It is it is the natural thing for us to conquer the continent, for us to go across and spread our influence across the continent. Economic hardships like the Panic of 1837 sent many people west, okay? Sent many people west. Every type of person went west, y'all. All types of people. Farmers, teachers, preachers, prostitutes. It doesn't matter who you are, y'all. Everybody went west, y'all. Everybody from a farmer to a teacher to a preacher to a prostitute. Everybody went west. Americans were not the first ones there. Remember, Native Americans are already there. And then on top of that, who had been colonizing this region even before white Americans had got that? The Spanish, right? So, in essence, the Spanish had been there, and they had developed strong ties. So what do we see at those Hispanics? In essence, Mexicans are already in this region. Remember, Mexico, New Spain, went well into North America. So ultimately, we see a lot of these different things. And just like we're going to fight for our independence from the British, all of these areas like Mexico and other places are going to fight for their independence from Spain. So we'll talk about that some more. But again, remember, Americans were not the first there. We already had Native Americans there as well as Mexicans. Okay? So let's get into it. Tyler's presidency. Whoa, wait. Let's figure this out. I know we took a break for a couple chapters, but think about that, y'all. When we last left politics, the election of 1840, William Henry Harrison got elected. So why are we talking about Tyler's presidency? Let's take a look real quick. William Henry Harrison took office in March of 1841 and died in April of 1841. It is the shortest term ever of a president, and he was the first president to die in office. Y'all, really interesting thing here. What we see is that a lot of people credit William Henry Harrison. It's funny because a lot of people give him like the title of the worst president ever because he didn't really do anything. But what's actually interesting is William Henry Harrison is known for having the longest inaugural speech of any president. Well, when he gave his speech, it was still cold, wet, rainy, bad weather up and around Washington when he gave his inaugural speech. But he's a man's man. He's going to stand outside and give his inaugural speech no matter what the weather's. Well, within a month, he contracts pneumonia and dies. So his vice president, John Tyler, is going to take over. But let's look at it a little bit more. What William Henry Harrison also gets credited for is beginning what a lot of people call the zero factor. And it's beginning with William Henry Harrison. Every president to be elected in a 0 year dies in office. Okay? And where does that come from? Remember, William Henry Harrison, how did he become famous? The Battle of Tippecanoe, right? So allegedly, a Native American spiritual person, a Native American miracle worker, mystic, whatever you want to call him, allegedly a Native American magical person or mystic, put a curse on William Henry Harrison to put a curse on him. And so he dies in office. But look at that. Every 20 years, we get a 0 year election, right? 1840, William Henry Harrison is elected, he dies in office. 1860, who's that? Lincoln, he dies in office. 1880, that's going to be, James Garfield. He dies in office. 1900. And it doesn't mean like they're assassinated or whatever. It doesn't mean that if you weren't elected in a 0 year, nothing comes of it. But every president elected in a 0 year, they die in office, right? So William Henry Harrison here in 1840, Lincoln in 1860, Garfield in 1880, William McKinley in 1900, 1920 is Harding, 1940 is going to be Franklin Roosevelt, 1960 is famously JFK, 1980 is where things get dicey, right? 1980 is going to be Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan does not die in office, but there were multiple assassination attempts on his life. Then 2000, George W. Bush, right? George W. Bush doesn't die in office, but remember the plane that went down in Pennsylvania from September 11th was supposed to be going to the White House. Now, Bush wasn't at the White House that day, so ultimately, how do we look at these things? Do we really want to look at how all of this plays out? Did Reagan and Bush break the curse? Did they not? Y'all, that is why I'm very interested, if nothing else, in the 2020 election. Y'all, think about it. And I don't say that in like this horrible, like, oh, I hope whoever wins dies, but y'all, like, is the curse broken? Is it not? And then think about it. At this point in time, as I'm recording this video, the two main candidates, it appears to be, for the two major parties, the incumbent President Donald Trump and the former Vice President Joe Biden. They're both older individuals, right? So it's really interesting to think about this. It was also the first time right after like the 2016 election when Donald Trump won and Kanye West talked about Kanye 2020. My first thought was, does he know about the zero factor? Anyway, but that's enough on that. Okay, so y'all, who is John Tyler? Let's look at him, okay? Is he a Whig? Is he not? Remember, what was the one thing all Whigs had in common? They disagreed with Jackson on one thing. Like, they hated Jackson because of one issue. They could have been really, really diehard Democrats, but on one issue they disagreed with Jackson. Well, that was Tyler. Tyler was only a Whig because of states' rights. And he was actually picked to balance the ticket. He was picked to kind of help get some of those Democratic voters to vote for the Whigs. But he hated Clay's American system. Y'all, and remember this. William Henry Harrison wasn't a big politician. He was really just supposed to be a front man for Henry Clay and Daniel Webster and some of the other big-time Whig leaders. Like, again, Henry Clay has made too many enemies. He can't run for president, or he's not going to win, right? But he can kind of control the show behind the scenes. So again, John Tyler takes over, but he's not really a front man for Clay. He's really a Democrat, except on the issue of states' rights. And again, he was picked to balance the ticket. Now, when we look at some domestic issues, Tyler upset the Whigs because he hated Clay's American system, and many of his cabinet are ultimately going to resign. But essentially, he's a president with no party to back him. Y'all, he appointed other cabinet members to help him out, other people that were like him. But at the end of the day, if there are other people like him, he's ultimately going to be a president without a party. He is a Whig president, or he's a Democrat that was elected by Whigs, so he really doesn't have a whole lot of strength, right? The Democrats don't want to go with him because he bailed on them. The Whigs don't really like him because he's not really a Whig. Okay? Then, when we look at foreign issues, they're going to be mainly with Britain about border issues and policing of the slave trade. We're going to get the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. That solved the border issues from Maine to Minnesota. So we're having some border issues, like where's the border between us and British Canada, between Maine and Minnesota? Remember, we have from Minnesota out to the Rocky Mountains, we have that from that Treaty of 1818, or a Convention of 1818. So we had that. But what about from Maine to Minnesota, from Maine out to the Great Lakes? Where's the border there? So that was the big issue we're dealing with here. So again, mainly with Britain about border issues and policing of the slave trade. We get the Webster-Ashburton Treaty that solved the border issues from Maine to Minnesota, and it provided for joint patrol along the African coast. So remember, we had abolished the African slave trade back in 1807. No more slaves could be brought from Africa into America. That was a thing. But there's a lot of issues about whether or not it's still going on. Well, this Webster-Ashburton Treaty not only gives us that border between Maine and Minnesota, but it also, we agree with the British to both patrol along the African coast to make sure we stop that. Okay, so now Western frontier. Okay? Many people begin to move west. Not many are overly concerned with politics. They want and need money, not government. Okay, so people are moving west. They're not overly concerned with politics. People, again, people going out west for a new start. They don't worry about everything else that's going on. They're worried about themselves. They want money. They need money. They don't care about government. If you cared about government, you would have stayed where you were and you'd have got involved. And they don't care about that. They care about going west, getting land, getting money. Okay, they want and need money, not government. On the way west, they encounter different societies. So as people are going west, as these Americans are going west, looking for land, looking for money, looking for opportunities, who are they encountering? Okay, several different societies. First, the Western Indians. We still have various types of tribes. Some are farmers, some are nomadic hunters, some are warriors. So we see all of the different Western Indians. They all, however, dislike the mass immigration of whites onto their lands. When some tribes tried to make agreements, the U.S. government ignored them and let its people run wild. Think about it, y'all. As we see more and more people moving west, what happened to, remember all the Native Americans Andrew Jackson forced to move out west? Oh yeah, we'll force them out west. Well, now Americans are going there too. And they're going even further and further and further. And every time they do, no matter what type of Native American tribe they're going to encounter, again, it could be, they could be farmers, they could be nomadic hunters, they could be warriors. They're all going to dislike the mass immigration of whites onto their land. Okay. Now, we also have to talk about how the Spanish West is going to become Mexican. What you see is just like the U.S. gained independence from Britain, Mexico, and its American territories. Basically, think Texas to California. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California, a little bit of Nevada, right? Okay, so from Texas to California, that whole region. So Mexico and its American territories did the same from Spain. They did this between 1810 and 1840. So between 1810 and 1840, Mexico is going to gain its independence from Spain. Well, what happens is that at that same time, Americans are moving in. So, let's recap real quick. You have white Americans moving west, engaging with Native Americans. Not really getting anything. Native Americans are being trampled, basically. And even when they try to make deals with the U.S. government about making deals, the U.S. government just ignores them and lets its people do whatever they want. Then we also see white Americans moving into this area that Mexicans believe is theirs, and they are fighting for their independence. They are fighting for independence from Spain to claim this territory. And now, ultimately, what's happening? At the same time, white Americans are moving in. So we see a lot of conflict, a lot of hands in the fire here, or a lot of irons in the fire, trying to take control of this land. Okay. Now let's look at Oregon settlement real quick. It was slow at first. So the settlement of Oregon, remember we had that joint territory of that joint territory between us and the British, who was controlling Oregon. So it was slow at first. The Oregon settlement was slow at first, but once trails are made and people realize the great forest and plentiful rain, Americans are going to flood the area. So it's really slow. The development of Oregon is really slow at first, but once we get a few trails going there, and people realize they got a bunch of awesome forests, and there's a lot of rain that helps these forests grow, people flock to the area. They just go there. You have to understand the lumber industry is a huge industry at this time. Everything is being made out of wood, right? So when you find these old, really big trees that can make, we can make a lot of stuff from one tree, it's super profitable. And so once people realize that there's plentiful forest, they go out there. If you've ever seen shows on like the History Channel, all those and all the other like A&E and stuff like that, they do all these logging shows. Where are they at? They're in Washington State. They're in Oregon. They're in that part of the region because they have these really old, strong trees in the region. Okay. Now we look at California. And I know I might be going a little fast, but just trying to get through as much of this as I can. Okay, so California settlement. Ooh, I didn't want to go there just yet. So California settlement. Under Spanish control, it was different than Texas and New Mexico. It was driven heavily by religion. So California is going to be different than what we see developing in Texas. It's going to be different than what we see developing in New Mexico. Okay, so California is just going to be different. It's heavily driven by by religion. Okay? Now, Americans will first come to the Sacramento area. Okay? So Americans first come to the Sacramento area because of John Sutter's trading fort, and John C. Fremont published his reports on his expeditions and paths, so he gets the nickname Pathfinder. So John Sutter set up a trading fort in Sacramento. So first Americans are coming there. How are they getting there? Because they read the works, they read the reports that John Fremont had published. And because he talked about the trails and the paths that he took, he becomes known as the Pathfinder, right? So John Sutter set up a trading fort, and John C. Fremont published his reports on the expeditions and paths. Now, how are Americans getting to these places out west? I mentioned it with Oregon, and again, I'm mentioning it here with California. People are going out west on trails, y'all. This is not like, there's not I-10 or I-12 out there telling, hey, go left, go west on I-10 till you get to... No, people are taking trails. The two famous trails are going to be the Santa Fe and Oregon Trail. So Americans are getting to these places by various trails. The two big ones are the Santa Fe and Oregon trails. And despite the myths, very few Indian attacks occurred. Most problems were from disease. So, there's a lot of rumors, and today it was like, oh yeah, people going out west, they were attacked by Native Americans. That was very rare. What happens is that most people died of disease. Maybe you've seen the game, Oregon Trail, right? You have died of dysentery. Most people died of disease on these long journeys out west. But once they made it, if they could stick it around, if they could stick it out, some of them became super profitable, right? And quick backstory, the little old computer game here that you see a screenshot of on the Oregon Trail, it was created, I think, by like a U.S. history teacher who wanted to teach their students, like, look, that people didn't die from all these Native American attacks, they died from disease, okay? So, gaining Texas, let's take a look at it, okay? American settlement. Actually, I'm going to pause just for a second, y'all. Alright, so we are back. Sorry about that pause. So, gaining Texas. First begins with some American settlements in Texas. Stephen F. Austin gets land in Texas and brings tons of American settlers with him. Okay? So many that it actually started to cause problems with the Mexican government, especially since the Americans were bringing in slaves. Okay, so your parents are out of town, okay, or maybe your parents aren't out of town. Your parents are at home, but they say you can have a small party. Okay, well, you invited 5 friends, but one of those friends invited some other people, and before you know it, this small little party of having 5 people over turns into about 100 people at your house. Your parents aren't cool with that, especially since some of the people who came that you didn't invite, but other people brought with them, are bringing in things that they shouldn't be, right? They're just acting up. They're doing things that your parents ultimately don't want. Okay, see some problems? Well, that's what we're having here. So, Stephen F. Austin gets land in Texas and brings in tons of American settlers. So many that it starts to cause problems with the Mexican government, especially since the Americans were bringing in slaves. Again, y'all remember, Mexico does not support slavery at this time. So when these Americans are bringing in slaves, that becomes a big issue. Now, the Mexican dictator, a guy by the name of Santa Anna, the Mexican dictator Santa Anna had big problems with the Americans. He expels them all and says to disarm all Texans. So we start to see this idea of, is Texas part of Mexico? Is it not? Are these people in Texas claiming to be Texans? Are they Mexican? Are they American? What's happening? This identity of Texas is kind of this weird thing that we have to think about, okay? Now, also let's think about that, y'all. If there's one place that is in the now modern-day United States where you're going to walk in and people would just laugh at you if they said, hey, we want you to give up all your guns. Might it be Texas? Maybe so. So anyway, he had big problems with Americans. He expels them all and says to disarm all Texans. Now we have problems between a small group of Texans. Again, when I say Texans at this point, I'm talking about those Americans that have come in. And they're Americans, but they're in Mexican territory, but they claim that they're kind of their own thing. So those Texans, okay? So now we have problems between a small group of Texans and a large group of Mexicans. Now, ultimately, what we're going to see is that these Texans are by and large white Americans who are going to say, well, we want to do it our way. And the Mexicans are like, no, this is our territory. You can't do it. And then the Texans are going to start to say, well, let's just fight for our interests. Let's find a way, whatever. Like, we're going to do what we want anyway. Because we're Texas. Or we're Texans, right? Okay. So now, in 1836, Santa Anna besieges the Alamo. Okay. In 1836, Santa Anna besieges the Alamo, and after 12 days of violent fighting, the Mexicans win. Only 16 Americans survived. While this is going on, Texans met and declared independence. They select Sam Houston as military leader. Houston had won a major victory just outside the city of Houston, go figure, and he captured Santa Anna. Now Santa Anna recognizes Texas to get freedom. So what happens is that the Americans at the Alamo are totally outnumbered. They're going to be decimated. Mexico wins a big victory here at Santa Anna. But then, around the same time, Sam Houston, the Texans declare their independence. They claim they're an independent place. They're not a part of Mexico. They're not a part of the United States. They are their own country. They declare their independence, and they select Sam Houston to be their leader, to be their military leader. He had just won a victory against Santa Anna. And what happens is that they had captured Santa Anna, and they say, Santa Anna, we'll let you go free if you acknowledge that we, Texans, are independent. And so he does. Okay? So they capture Santa Anna. Capture Santa Anna, Santa Anna recognizes Texas to get his freedom. Now the Texans draft a constitution and make Sam Houston president. They want to be part of the U.S. as soon as possible. Okay? So they say, hey, we want to be a part of the U.S. as soon as possible, but they draft the Constitution and make Sam Houston president. No surprise, y'all. Does that kind of sound like a George Washington thing? Hey, we got this military leader who's this great leader, and now we're going to make him president, right? So they do that, but they want to be a part of the U.S. as soon as possible. But because Texas allowed slavery and banned free blacks, it was a political nightmare. It will not be offered admission until the end of Tyler's term and not become a state until Polk is in office. So the politics really determine its union. So these Texans declare their independence, they gain their independence, but say, hey, we want to be a part of the U.S. as soon as possible. The problem is that they allow slavery and ban free blacks. So if you're a black person in Texas, you have to be a slave. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You can't be a free black in Texas. And that's a big time political issue. And we've seen already what happened with the Missouri Compromise and having to add Maine and all these different things. And so here, when Texas can become part of the United States is a bit of an issue. Okay? So we move on. That brings us to the election of 44. Okay? The Whigs nominate Clay. They finally nominate Clay. Clay is finally going to run for president. He's finally, I don't want to say run, but he's finally going to be the guy, right? The Whigs have the momentum. Everything's going their way, right? It's awesome. So the Whigs nominate Clay, but they decide not to talk about Texas and Manifest Destiny because of the whole slavery thing. Again, the Whigs, they don't want to talk about things when their own political party is so divided. Remember, the big thing they disagreed, or the big thing they agreed on, was their dislike of Jackson. So they don't want to talk about Texas because of the issues of Manifest Destiny and slavery. Okay? The Democrats fight over who to nominate, but they ultimately go with James K. Polk of Tennessee. And they talked a lot about westward expansion. Well, westward expansion is the big issue. Okay? So the Democrats and Polk win because they talked about the one big thing that people really wanted. So Henry Clay finally gets the nomination of his party, but is not going to win because they didn't talk about the one big issue. Or at least they didn't spend enough time. Now, who is Polk? Let's talk about it. Okay? Polk is known as Young Hickory. Jackson was Old Hickory. Here, Polk is going to be known as Young Hickory. Okay? Because just like Andrew Jackson, he was stubborn and unbreakable. He overworked himself while in office, but it paid off. He got everything he set out for. He got everything he set out for. He lowered tariffs. He got a new independent treasury. He vetoed internal improvements. And the most important thing now is he expanded the nation. So what we see is that he overworked himself. But everything he set out to do, he did. The biggest is expanding the nation. And when we really sit down and think about that, y'all, how many times do we see politicians say they're going to do this, this, and this? And if they get one out of the three, we're happy. Like, oh, hey, you did one of the three things you said you promised. Hey, that's awesome. Here, he does everything he set out to do. Okay? Now, Texas is going to go in under him, even though he really had nothing to do with it. Okay, so westward expansion is a big thing. He gains Texas. Texas becomes a state under him, but really he didn't have much to do with it. Now, also let's talk about Oregon. So the U.S. and England still have joint custody, but Polk says he wants to split it at the 49th parallel. Okay, the same line as the rest of the country. I don't have a map, but let me see here. I don't have that map. Let me pause just for a second. Alright, so what we see is that, remember, the U.S. and England still have joint custody, but Polk says he wants to split it at the 49th parallel. The same line as the rest of the country. But England says no. Okay? And I pulled up a map. What we see here is this whole region right here, this whole tan region, was controlled by both the United States and British Canada, right? So we all look like, we both say, oh, we can, Americans and Canadians can be in any of this area. Well, what Polk wants to do is he wants to set the border at the 49th parallel, like the same as the rest of the country. Let's just carry it across. This will be American. This will be British Canada. And remember, 5440 line, that's the bottom of Russian Alaska, right? So he says, this will be for British Canada, this will be American. Well, what happens is that the British say, no, we don't want that. We don't want to split it. We like it the way it's going right now. Okay? Well, so what's Polk's response? Polk now threatens to take control of the whole thing by force. So England lets up and agrees to the 49th parallel. Polk says, look, let's cut it in half. Same line as the rest of the country. We have a side, y'all have a side, everybody's cool. British are like, no, we want to use the whole thing. Polk's like, okay, you want to play it like that? Fine, I'll take the whole thing and I'll use my military to do it. And now Britain backs up like, okay, we can split it. So he threatens to use force and gets a good solid boundary. Okay? Now, that brings us to the Mexican War. Okay? Mexico is still upset, y'all. Mexican War, let me just say this. It's going to begin in 1846. The Mexican War is going to begin in 1846. Now, what we see is that Mexico is still upset about the whole Texas thing. No surprise. They believe Texas is their territory. They believe it's theirs. They kind of want it back. So they're still pretty upset. Now, so Mexico is still upset about the whole Texas thing, and they dispute all of the American claims. Every time we have to discuss where the border of Texas is, the Mexicans dispute it. So Polk sends Zachary Taylor down to handle the situation. Polk tells Taylor, don't start the war, just provoke it. Because Polk needed the war to justify his actions and help get land. What Polk is saying here is, if I start a war and take land from you, I look like a bad guy. But if you throw the first punch and then I beat you, like if you throw the first punch, I beat you up, I don't look like a bad guy and I can take stuff from you. Because you attacked me first. Well, I'm just so what's he tell Zachary Taylor do? He tells Zachary Taylor, don't start the war, just provoke it. Very much what, y'all? When you have that sibling, you're on a car ride, right? And the sibling looks over at you and just does, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you, I'm not touching you. And then you do what? Slap their hand, and what's their response? Mom, he hit me! Right? That sort of scenario. That's what Polk actually is telling Taylor to do. Don't start the war. Just make sure it happens. Provoke them, edge them on, instigate it, if you will. Okay? So, Polk sends Zachary Taylor down to handle the situation, tells Taylor, don't start the war, just provoke it. Again, Polk needed the war to justify his actions and to help get land. Now, some Americans get killed, and Polk calls for a war, and we get it. So, we see some stuff happening, we see some Americans get killed, and now Polk's going to call for war, and he's ultimately going to get it. Now, not everyone was in favor of it. In New England, some people even talked about secession. Again, y'all, people up in New England saying, hey, why are we fighting a war? Why are we fighting a war with the Mexicans? What is the point of all this? Yada, yada, yada. Some people talk about secession. Even a very young Abraham Lincoln questions what some people call a spot declaration. He questioned, was it even American soil? So, very much, think about it like this. If Americans went into Mexican land and were killed, it's a lot different than if they were in American land and Mexicans came in and killed them, right? If the American military was in Mexico and they got shot and killed, well, why were they there to begin with, right? But if the American military was in America and Mexicans killed them, well, hey, they're invading us, right? So even people like Lincoln question, was it even American soil? Are we really just edging on this whole war? So we see some people up in New England, even a young Abraham Lincoln, is going to question, is this war just? Right? Now, American preparation. Let's understand this, y'all. Both the U.S. and Mexico were not ready. Both the U.S. and Mexico were not ready. Y'all, the U.S. only had about 7,000 troops at this point. The United States only has about 7,000 troops. There is no real practice for troops because there had been no war since 1850. Here we are, y'all, 1846. It's been 30 years since the last battle, since the last war in America, right? So there's no real practice for the troops because there hadn't been a war since 1815. Think about that, y'all. There hadn't been a war since the Battle of New Orleans. So we got 30 years, the military really hadn't had practice. So American leaders here will be Winfield Scott and Zachary Taylor. I told you, Winfield Scott's going to be big. Okay? So American leaders will be Winfield Scott and Zachary Taylor. Y'all, Polk liked Taylor more because because Taylor listened to Polk and Scott didn't. Also, Polk didn't see Taylor as a political threat. That's going to change over time because what we'll see is that Taylor actually does become president. And by the way, Taylor, only president with a direct Louisiana connection. Zachary Taylor actually lived, Zachary Taylor, the only president with a direct Louisiana connection. He actually lived basically downtown Baton Rouge. If you're from Baton Rouge or if you know downtown Baton Rouge, there's a little marker that says where Zachary Taylor had a residence at. Okay? So no real practice for the troops since the War of 1815. American leaders will be Winfield Scott and Zachary Taylor. Again, at the beginning, Polk likes Taylor more because Taylor listens to what Polk wants him to do. Winfield Scott just doesn't care what Polk thinks he's going to do. It he believes is best. And again, Polk sees Winfield Scott as a political threat, whereas he doesn't see that from Zachary Taylor. That will change over time, though. Okay. Now, the annexation of California. This all kind of fits in. I know it sounds like I'm going all over the place, y'all, but I'm really not. Okay. So, the annexation of California. Also in 1846, around the same time as the war, the U.S. tries to get California. Okay, so around the same time as the war, the U.S. tries to get California. John Slidell had been trying to buy it from Mexico, but he failed. Now John Fremont and others declared parts of California independent and part of a republic that they called the Republic of California, a.k.a. the Bear Flag Republic. So John Slidell had been trying to buy, like the city of Slidell, y'all, comes from this dude, right? Okay, but anyway, John Slidell had been trying to buy for the U.S. government. That doesn't work. Well, then, after that doesn't work, John Fremont, remember our Pathfinder guy, right? He just declares parts of California independent. He says, we are the Republic of California. We are independent. We're not a part of Mexico anymore. And we are going to be known as the Republic of California. They get the nickname the Bear Flag Republic. Why? Because their flag has a bear on it. Go figure. Okay? So parts of California are declared independent as a part of this Bear Flag Republic. Now Americans hear about this, and they come in and make the Bear Flag Republic part of the U.S. Okay? So the fighting on this is going to last until 1847, when finally Mexico just gives up and like, all right, fine, you took California. Okay, so there's all of that, but again, California is going to declare itself independent, much like we saw with Texas, and then ultimately work its way into being a part of the United States. Interesting thing though here, y'all, we've talked about the annexation of California, we've talked about Texas, right? So California is Bear Flag Republic. Texas is known as the Lone Star Republic or the Lone Star State. Quick question. Do any of you know the original Lone Star Republic? The first republic in America to fly the Lone Star flag. That one star in a solid background was actually in Louisiana, y'all. What's known as the Republic of West Florida. Think places like on the North Shore, right? What was known as that. Remember, Florida used to stretch all the way over into Louisiana. That bottom part of Mississippi and Alabama, all part of what was the Florida Panhandle at one time. Yo, in the early 1800s, a little region for about 3 months, what's known as the Florida parishes today, were declared themselves an independent country, the Republic of West Florida, and lived as such for about 3 months. Really interesting thing about it. Again, y'all, we always think Texas as the Lone Star State, but again, the Republic of West Florida was the first one to fly the Lone Star flag. Now, back to war. Okay, let's get back to the war. Okay, there are two main areas of fighting: the northern Mexico, which is going to be led by Zachary Taylor, in South and Central Mexico, which is going to be led by Winfield Scott. Okay, so we have the Northern War led by Taylor, and the South and Central part of the war led by Winfield Scott. Okay, Santa Anna returned to Mexico. He had been away for a while. He returned to Mexico with Polk's help. He told Polk, look, he had been basically imprisoned, and what we see is that Polk helps him go back to Mexico. Polk helps Santa Anna go back to Mexico. Why? Because Santa Anna tells him, look, if you let me go down to Mexico, I can negotiate. I can make all this better. I don't know why Polk would do that. That's why I call it Polk's blunder, because why would you let this guy who tried to conquer Texas and tried to keep Texas away from you, let him go? But he does. So Santa Anna returned to Mexico with Polk's help. Again, he said he would help negotiate. But now he takes control of the army. So since Santa Anna is back and in the north, Polk decides to use Scott's forces in the south to attack, starting with Veracruz and moving on to Mexico City. Remember, y'all, who does Polk see as a political threat? Winfield Scott. What does he want to do? He wants to keep Winfield Scott as far away from Santa Anna as possible. He doesn't want Winfield Scott to be anywhere near a fighting zone that could give him name recognition, that can make him more popular, right? So what's he do? He puts Zachary Taylor in charge in the north. The funny thing is that this actually upsets Taylor, because Taylor knew the main part of the war was going to be in the south and central. So Zachary Taylor is actually upset by this. So this upsets Taylor, and he attacks Santa Anna at Buena Vista. Here, Taylor had a lot of help from his son-in-law, a guy by the name of Jefferson Davis. Maybe you've heard of him. He had a big house in Biloxi, and named Bovar, and would actually go on to become the president of the Confederate States of America. Important to remember here, in this Mexican War, a lot of military personnel who will fight in the Civil War, this is where they get that start. Remember, this war, there hadn't been practice for the military since War of 1812. Here, this is in essence we're going to see a lot of young military minds get their first taste of war and first get to battle others and kind of see how real war works before they fight each other in the Civil War. And that's one of the interesting things, is that once we get to the Civil War, a lot of these guys had worked alongside one another in the Mexican War. But anyway, so Taylor is upset, but he attacked Santa Anna at Buena Vista. He had a lot of help from his son-in-law, Jefferson Davis. But it was a stalemate in the last major action in the north. Again, that's why Taylor's upset. Taylor knows that the war is going to be fought in South and Central Mexico, so that's where he wants to fight. So now he's upset. Now Taylor becomes upset with Polk, and he doesn't forget that. Taylor takes a leave to return to the U.S., and all the while hates and belittles Polk for taking the war away from him. So the whole time, Polk is just upset, Taylor is upset and blames Polk for taking the war, taking his opportunity at fame away from him. So Zachary Taylor really gets upset with Polk here. Now, let's look at Scott's triumph. The army left New Orleans. Scott's army left New Orleans and headed by ship to Mexico. They landed in Veracruz. It was the first major amphibious operation by U.S. forces. They win quickly in Veracruz and move on and win at Cerro Gordo. So we see, y'all, Veracruz. The Scottish troops leave. New Orleans, head by ship down to Mexico. They land in Veracruz. They make the first major amphibious invasion, going from water onto land. Right? Think about it. An amphibian does what? It lives on land and water. So first amphibious operation by U.S. forces, first major one at least. They win at Veracruz. They win quickly, and they move on and win at Cerro Gordo. Here, Scott beats Santa Anna. So even despite Polk's attempt to keep Winfield Scott away from Santa Anna, he's still going to fight him. And he wins. He beats Santa Anna at Cerro Gordo. Now Scott waits for reinforcements, and in September of 1847, the Americans took Mexico City. So y'all, think about what has just happened. Polk tried to keep Scott away from the main fighting, but this is exactly what Zachary Taylor got upset about. Scott now comes in, he wins at Veracruz, he beats Santa Anna at Cerro Gordo, and then he will go in and conquer Mexico City. What more fame could a general want than to conquer another nation's capital, right? To conquer Mexico City like that. So we waited for reinforcements, and in September of 1847, the Americans took Mexico City. Now Santa Anna leaves Mexico, and we get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Okay, so Santa Anna leaves Mexico, we get the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Mexico gave up all claims to Texas above the Rio Grande River, and California and New Mexico. Now, at this point in time, New Mexico and Arizona are all one territory that we call New Mexico. At this time, there's no state or there's no territory of Arizona. Arizona and New Mexico are all one. Okay, so Texas above the Rio Grande River, California, and New Mexico. Mexico gave up all claims to that. The U.S. also paid $15 million to Mexico. Okay, look, hey, we'll pay you $15 million. Okay, so that's the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, what's the legacy of the war? Casualties. Americans had over 15,000, but 11,000 were from disease. Over 15,000, but 11,000 were from disease. The Mexicans had over 50,000 casualties. So think about it. Americans are going to lose basically 4,000 casualties in combat. Mexicans had 10 times that in 50,000 casualties. But it is the highest percentage death rate of all American wars. So when we talk about percentages, think about it. 15 of all the people that served, 15,000 Americans died. It's not the number. Yes, we will lose more people in the Civil War, in World War I, in World War II, without a doubt. But when you look at percentage, like the number of people who were casualties to the total number of people who served, this is the highest percentage of all American wars. Highest percentage death rate of American wars. When we look at land, it gave us the majority of the rest of the modern-day continental United States, excluding the Gadsden Purchase of the 1850s for the railroad. Now, I know that's a very, very convoluted term, a very convoluted note, but just listen to it again. It gave us the majority of the rest of the modern-day continental United States, excluding the Gadsden Purchase of the 1850s for the railroad. So what we see is that, now, after this war, the continental U.S. is set, except for a small little piece of land we'll buy from Mexico later on. A small little sliver of land that we call the Gadsden Purchase. Outside of that, the continental U.S. is now set. Here we are, 1847. And again, with the exception of a small little chunk of land that we'll talk about later, or in the next chapter, the United States is set, at least the continental. Yeah, eventually we'll get Alaska, and eventually we'll get Hawaii, but when we look at it, ultimately, the U.S., the continental U.S., is pretty set. Okay? First time for everything, y'all. It was the first successful offensive war for the Americans. We had the first amphibious operation. It was the first war covered by correspondence. So, first time we offensively went to war and we were successful. There's no doubt we won this war. War of 1812, did we win? Did we not? It's really a stalemate, but America got a lot of pride. We got a lot from it. Even if we didn't get land or negotiations, America get right. But here, there's doubt about the War of 1812. Here, the Mexican-American War in the 1840s, again, There is no doubt about it. The Mexican War that began in 1846, there's no doubt the Americans won this one. Okay, first successful offensive war, had the first amphibious operation, the first war covered by correspondence. First time we see basically the news going out and covering the war. Again, it's not going to be the same way we see it today. Today, you have representatives from news agencies out embedded with military units. It's not like that, but it was the first time the news really covered a war in that way. Now, it was the first major experience for many military leaders, people like U.S. Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, Thomas Stonewall Jackson, George McClellan, George Meade, Braxton Bragg, Robert E. Lee, and Jefferson Davis. Every single one of those people is going to play an important role in the Civil War. In here, they got experience in the war, and they got experience in many ways, seeing how the other one reacts. The two famous generals, the two biggest generals of the Civil War are going to be U.S. Grant and Robert E. Lee. Did they learn something about one another from this? Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But the opportunity for all of these people to gain experience prior to the Civil War. Part of one of the things that makes the Civil War so deadly is that a lot of the leaders had some experience. So look at that. Polk wanted unity. Polk thought all the land would unify America. That's why Polk wanted to gain all this land. He thought all this land would unite America. Polk thought all of the land would unify Americans. But it made things worse because now more debates and conflicts arose about extending slavery to these areas. So Polk wanted unity, but ultimately he got increased division. He thought having all this land would unify and bring Americans together. We control this entire huge area. We are the dominant force on the continent. But what it actually did was it led to increased debate and increased conflict over where slavery could go and where it couldn't go. And that is where we're going to end chapter 14. We will pick up chapter 15 in the next one. Okay? So, again, I hope all of you are doing well, and that wraps up chapter 14. We'll see chapter 15 on the next one.